At dinner with some great friends one night, the subject of bucket list did indeed come up. And as we were sipping our wine, we started talking about all the destinations we wanted to include in that list. And everybody at that dinner seemed to have some passion, some dream, some hobby, or some destination that they wanted to pursue before they kicked the bucket. Well, on the surface, that concept sounds pretty good. But in actuality, I think it is a flawed concept. Why? Because most everyone's bucket runs dry. I want to tell you a story about a friend of mine. His name is Sam. That's not his real name, but he's a real person. And Sam is a boomer, and he fashions himself as a responsible family man. His home is an essential part of his retirement planning. Yeah, he has a pension and a small IRA, but the value that he has in that home that's now without mortgage is the primary component of his retirement planning. Unfortunately, in 2008, the recession took a big bite out of that value. And that's prompted Sam to have to stretch his career for a few more years past what he hoped would be his retirement age. Now, he found that delay very, very frustrating. He was so looking forward to retirement. Sam is the vice president of sales for PVC Piping, a manufacturer and supplier of home irrigation systems. Now, the job he had there reliably put food on his table for 35 plus years. But the truth be told, he found little joy and satisfaction in his role in that company. And he looks back with a certain sense of bewilderment and just how did he get trapped in that career path? He would admit that in his college years, he had no intentional strategic focus about his career. And even after he got his diploma, he would say he was still finding himself. He took a series of menial jobs after college. Mostly they were extensions of past summer employment. And it wasn't until his father-in-law introduced him to the president and founder of PVC Plastics in hopes that his new son-in-law would get a real job that would provide for his daughter and his grandchildren, that he got a job. And initially that job did seem like it had more meaning. But by the time he reached his 30s, he knew that he was looking for something more from his career. Now, those of us who are senior care practitioners might not understand his dilemma. Because, you guys, we are blessed to be part of an industry that has a very easily defined mission and one that's very attractive and noble. After all, we're caring for the most important person in people's lives, their parents. Well, Sam, like us, wanted to have two paychecks. One financial and one emotional. He was in the dogged pursuit for finding some meaning and purpose, as well as that paycheck. But he had one problem. Along the way, he started a family, and he took on a huge home mortgage. At least it seemed huge at that time, and a couple car payments as well. He was financially and emotionally trapped in his existing career path. The notion of starting over felt financially out of bounds for him. He could not reboot his career because he was a responsible family man. And he often wonders what life would have looked like if he had been more intentional in his 20s. He is absolutely convinced he was made for a greater purpose than helping people keep their lawns green during the long, hot summer months. Well, Sam is not alone. There are millions of boomers who have fallen into the same vocational trap. And by the millions, they will enter the retirement years without the burdens of their previous careers. And they have been looking forward to retirement for quite some time. They have some money, they have some reasonable health, and they are armed with these bucket lists. But it's rather ironic that these baby boomers, brethren we have, are going to enter retirement with no more strategic intentionality than they entered their previous careers. Ken Dykewald, who's been quoted many times this week, has said that many have formulated a vague notion of an unwritten plan for aging that includes the notion of the perfect timing where just as you cross off the last item on your bucket list, you're going to die peacefully at sleep in your home. Well, there's a saying that goes, if you want to make God laugh, just go ahead and tell him your plans. How many of you have formed your own bucket lists? Most of us have really, at least informally, have devised such a plan somewhere in the deep recesses of our mind. But there's one problem with a bucket list. Buckets eventually empty. Now, many of the believe that the boomers, just because of the sheer size of our population, will redefine middle age to include their 70s. And thanks to the increased life expectancy that we heard yesterday, there is enough time for us to do something significant with the rest of our lives. We've seen everyone from Nelson Mandela to Colonel Sanders reinvent themselves in their 70s. Statistically speaking, we've heard that many of us will live well over 30 years after retirement. So the change in the course of the direction of our careers is just not a luxury for boomers. It is an existential necessity. Boomers realize that this is a time in their lives to discover their encore moment. They'll be bored with self-amusement and acquiring things, and they will begin to invest outward into the next generation, into their communities, and into some cause or some project that's bigger than themselves. Now, some of us are going to need to redefine our success. I got a lot of type A personalities in this room that are very adept at moving up through the ranks and rising to the top. But quite possibly, this might be a time for us to explore a less arduous path to success, a path that provides a whole lot more meaning than just ego gratification. And we might start by asking ourselves some questions. If working to the top were no longer relevant, after all, a lot of us have been there, then what else would we want to strive for? What would bring us energy and joy when we arise to go to work every day? And what will be the ultimate influence we are to have had in this world? Thoughtful boomers understand that man's sense of being is not only to live, but it's to live for something that's bigger than ourselves, to live for a calling. Now, a book I'd like to recommend was written by one of the speakers at yesterday's luncheon, David Brooks. He wrote a book called The Road to Character. And in it, he says that people with a calling have their values in deep harmony and deep congruency with their behavior. And they experience a wonderful certainty of action that banishes weariness from even their hardest days. These people are experiencing the satisfaction of pursuing a calling. And then he goes on to describe two sets of virtues. He calls them the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. Now, the resume virtues are the skills that we bring to the marketplace. But the eulogy virtues, they're the ones that they talk about at your funeral. Whether you are kind, you're brave, you're honest, you're faithful, or you had the capacity to give deep love. And the eulogy virtues, I think most of us would realize, are the ones that make a lasting difference in our world. Now, senior care folks, we already know the regenerative joy and vitality that accompanies from giving ourselves to a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And I've noticed that there are many people who are the people who lead the most satisfying lives, like Bill and Melinda Gates, are people who have learned that this is a time to give away their time, their wisdom, as well as their money. Boomers, some of us boomers, are serious about wanting to leave a multi-generational legacy. And that will require us to pursue a calling that involves a collaboration with another generation almost as large as ours, the millennials. And I have found that sitting in the right seat while the millennials drive is a terrific posture from which to observe, gently counsel, and to learn. Moreover, joining forces with this group will give us some fresh outlooks and keep us young. Well, I want to get back to Sam because I told you he solved the problem of the empty bucket. And he was determined that his 70s were not going to be an absurd parody of his former adult life. He was in the hunt for meaning. And he linked up with a 28-year-old young entrepreneur named Brittany that he met at his church. And he was convinced that his gifts and his business acumens would really complement nicely this young entrepreneur who had already made a name for herself. And he was confident that Brittany's vision was big enough for him to spend the rest of his working days in a very satisfactory way. See, Brittany had worked with the city planners to identify troubled and blighted areas in downtown Bay Area that were ripe for revitalization. These areas were often full of vacant homes, had illegal drug purveyors, vagrants, and criminals. And she started merely by restoring 10 homes, did a beautiful job on that. And she attracted other fellow developers to do the same in the same block. Pretty soon, contiguous blocks were rejuvenated. Sam got some of his business contacts, worked some of his business contacts to move some of their businesses into the area. They got the city to collaborate. They built a beautiful new park, and they put capital investments in the local elementary school. You know, Sam wore all kinds of hats in this endeavor, and he loved it. Never before had he felt so energized in his vocation. Yeah, his take-home salary is a bit lower, but his emotional paycheck was many times greater because he saw the tangible ways that he was making a difference, a life-giving difference in the city. His bucket was full with a deep, satisfying sense that he was finishing his career in a very meaningful way. Well, how about you? Do you have some vaguely defined bucket list that you hope will bring you satisfaction in the next season of life? Or do you plan to pursue a calling where you will discover your redeeming encore moment? You know, there's a saying goes that you can retire from jobs, but you will not retire from a calling that gives your life meaning. I encourage you to think strategically about your own purpose, your own passion, and then go after that double paycheck. Thank you.